What Michael didn't know was that while he was meeting with real estate agents to sell what he thought was, quote, his inheritance, I was quietly transferring the $3.8 million property empire he'd never heard of into a trust that would make him a tenant in his own childhood home. And the, quote, confused old widow he planned to move into assisted living was about to become his landlord. Before we dive in, let me know in the comments where you're watching from, and if this story resonates with you, make sure to hit that subscribe button. Because tomorrow, I have something even more shocking lined up for you. I'm 74 years old. Last month, I became the most underestimated woman in my late husband's family circle. Not the kind of underestimation that comes from being overlooked or ignored. The kind that comes from people assuming that grief has made you helpless, that widowhood has left you confused and dependent, that losing your husband means you've also lost your ability to think clearly about your own life. Michael is still trying to figure out how his overwhelmed mother managed to become his landlord overnight, how the house he was planning to sell suddenly belongs to a trust he can't touch, how the woman he was ready to move into assisted living now controls every property decision in his future. Condition. What he hasn't figured out is simple. The woman he assumed was too grief-stricken to handle her own affairs wasn't confused about anything. She was watching. And when a woman who's built a real estate empire for 40 years starts watching her own son plot against her, that son learns very quickly that assumptions can be financially devastating. Let me tell you about the funeral that changed everything. The funeral where my son decided I was no longer capable of living independently. The funeral that cost him the inheritance he thought was guaranteed simply by being my only child. The funeral. It was Thursday, September 12th. 3 days after we buried my husband Robert at Greenwood Cemetery. The house was still full of sympathy flowers. The refrigerator was still stocked with casseroles from neighbors who meant well but didn't know what else to do with their awkwardness around grief. I'd been married to Robert for 46 years. We'd built our life together in the beautiful Victorian house on Elm Street that he'd inherited from his parents. 4 bedrooms, 3 bathrooms, wraparound porch, original hardwood floors. The kind of house that anchors a neighborhood and holds a lifetime of memories. Robert and I had raised Michael in that house, watched him take his first steps in the living room, helped him with homework at the kitchen table, celebrated his high school graduation on the front porch. The house wasn't just our home, it was the foundation of our family's story. But on that Thursday morning, 3 days after the funeral, Michael was sitting at that same kitchen table treating our family home like a problem that needed solving. He'd been staying with me since the funeral. "Just to help you get organized, Mom," he'd said when he arrived with 2 suitcases and his laptop. "There's a lot to figure out after Dad's passing. A lot to figure out." As if I hadn't been managing our family's finances for the past 20 years, while Robert focused on his medical practice. As if I hadn't been the one handling insurance claims, tax returns, and investment decisions while my husband saved lives at the hospital. The first sign of trouble came during breakfast. Michael was sitting at the kitchen table with papers spread everywhere. Legal documents, insurance forms, what looked suspiciously like real estate listings. He had his laptop open to multiple browser tabs. His phone was buzzing constantly with text messages. "Mom," he said in that careful tone people use when they think you're fragile, "we need to talk about some practical matters." Practical matters. I poured myself another cup of coffee and sat down across from him. The morning light was streaming through the kitchen window, the same window where I'd watched Robert drink his coffee every morning for 4 decades. "What kind of practical matters?" I asked. Michael glanced at his papers nervously, like he was preparing to deliver bad news. "Well, this house is really too big for you now. It's a lot of maintenance, a lot of space you don't need. I think it might be time to consider downsizing." Downsizing. The word hung in the air like smoke from a fire nobody wanted to acknowledge. Such a gentle word for such a massive life disruption. Why, downsizing to what? I asked. I've been looking at some really nice senior communities. Beautiful places with activities and medical support. Places where you wouldn't have to worry about home repairs or yard work or any of the stresses that come with maintaining a house this size. Senior communities. Medical support. Michael was talking about assisted living facilities. He was suggesting that 3 days after burying my husband, I should also abandon the home we'd shared for nearly 5 decades. Michael, I said slowly, I'm 74 years old, not 94. I'm perfectly capable of maintaining my own home. Mom, I know you think you are, but this house is enormous. The heating bills alone must be costing you a fortune. And what if something happens? What if you fall down those stairs? What if there's an emergency and no one's here to help? What if? Michael was building a case for my incompetence based entirely on hypothetical scenarios. As if the possibility of future problems justified immediate radical changes to my life. Michael, I've been living in this house for 46 years. I think I know how to navigate my own stairs. But Mom, that was when Dad was here. Everything's different now. As if losing Robert had somehow erased my ability to live independently. As if widowhood automatically meant helplessness. What are you really suggesting? I asked. Michael pulled out a folder I hadn't noticed before, a thick manila folder with printed documents and photographs. I've talked to a couple of real estate agents. The housing market is really strong right now. This house could sell for close to $400,000. $400,000. Michael had gotten appraisals on my house without asking me, without telling me, without even considering that I might want to be involved in decisions about my own property. You had real estate agents evaluate my house? Just preliminary assessments, Mom. I wanted to understand our options before we had this conversation. Our options. My house had become our decision. My property had become our asset to manage. My home had become our problem to solve. And what would happen to the money from selling my house? Well, obviously it would be used for your care. The senior community I'm looking at costs about $3,000 a month. With $400,000 from the house sale, plus Dad's life insurance and your Social Security, you'd be financially secure for years. Michael had calculated exactly how long my money would last in assisted living. He'd done the math on my remaining life expectancy and created a budget for managing my decline. Which senior community? I asked. Michael pulled out a brochure, Sunny Meadows Retirement Village. The cover showed smiling elderly people playing bingo and doing water aerobics. The kind of place that advertised active aging and worry-free living. It's really nice, Mom. They have a dining room so you don't have to cook. Activities coordinators to keep you engaged. Medical staff on site 24 hours a day. Transportation for shopping and appointments. A dining room so I don't have to cook. As if cooking had become an impossible burden, rather than something I enjoyed. Activities coordinators to keep me engaged. As if I couldn't find my own ways to spend my time. Michael, what makes you think I want to sell my house and move to a senior facility? Mom, you're not thinking clearly right now. Grief does that to people, it affects judgment. It makes it hard to see the practical realities of your situation. Not thinking clearly. Not able to see practical realities. My son had decided that losing my husband had also cost me my mental capacity. That grief had impaired my ability to make rational decisions about my own life. I'm thinking very clearly, I said. Clear enough to wonder why you're making plans for my life without consulting me. Because someone has to make the hard decisions, Mom. Someone has to be practical about your future. Someone has to think about what's best for you long term. Someone has to make the hard decisions. As if I hadn't been making hard decisions about money and property for decades while he was growing up. As if my judgment had suddenly become unreliable because I was grieving. What about what I want? I asked. Mom, what you want isn't always what's best for you. You're emotionally attached to this house because of memories with Dad. But those memories aren't going to help you if you can't manage the physical demands of living here. Emotionally attached. Michael was dismissing my preferences as sentiment rather than legitimate choice. As if wanting to stay in my own home was irrational nostalgia rather than a reasonable decision about where to live. Have you considered that I might want to stay in my own home? Mom, be realistic. You can't handle this place on your own. It's too much house for one person. Too much responsibility. Too much risk. Can't handle this place. Too much responsibility. Michael was speaking about my capabilities like they were established facts rather than his assumptions, like he'd conducted some kind of assessment that proved my incompetence. What specific things do you think I can't handle? Well, The yard work, for one thing. Dad always took care of the landscaping. The gutters need cleaning. The driveway needs resealing. The furnace is getting old. There are a dozen maintenance issues that you're not equipped to deal with. Not equipped to deal with. As if home maintenance required skills I couldn't possibly possess or hire others to provide. Michael, people hire contractors for those things. There are services that handle home maintenance. But Mom, that costs money, and you have to manage all those contractors. You have to know who to call and how much to pay and whether they're doing good work. It's complicated. It's complicated. As if I hadn't been managing household affairs for nearly 5 decades. As if I'd suddenly lost the ability to make phone calls and write checks. That's when I realized what was really happening. Michael hadn't come home to help me grieve or adjust to life without Robert. He'd come home to manage what he saw as a crisis that required his intervention. He'd decided that widowhood had made me incompetent, that grief had impaired my judgment, that losing Robert meant I needed a guardian to make decisions about my own life. More than that, he'd already started implementing his plan. The real estate appraisals. The senior community research. The financial calculations. Michael wasn't asking for my input. He was preparing to present me with a solution he'd already decided was best. Michael, I said, I appreciate your concern, but I'm not ready to make any major decisions about selling the house. Mom, the longer we wait, the harder this is going to be. It's better to handle these transitions while you're still mentally sharp. Michael was suggesting that my mental decline was inevitable and imminent, that I had a limited window of competence before grief or age rendered me incapable of making my own decisions. I think I'll hold off on any changes for now, I said. Michael's expression shifted from patience to frustration. The careful, gentle tone disappeared. Mom, you're not being reasonable. I'm trying to help you plan for a secure future. And I'm telling you I don't need that kind of help right now. But Mom, you do need help. You just don't realize it yet. That's what grief does. It makes people think they're fine when they're actually struggling. You don't realize it yet. Michael was telling me that I didn't understand my own mental state, that he could see problems I couldn't recognize, that his assessment of my capabilities was more accurate than my own self-knowledge. Michael, this is my house. These are my decisions to make. Not if you're not capable of making them rationally. There it was, the assumption that would cost him everything he thought he was entitled to inherit. Michael believed that grief had made me incapable of rational decision-making. He believed that widowhood required his intervention and management. He believed that my emotional attachment to the house proved I wasn't thinking clearly about my practical needs. But there was something else in his attitude. Something that went beyond concern for my welfare. Michael was talking about my house like it was already his to manage, my future like it was his to plan, my money like it was his to allocate. He was acting like someone who'd already inherited. Like Robert's death had transferred ownership of my life along with whatever assets he expected to receive. Michael, I said carefully, what makes you think you have the right to make these decisions for me? I'm your son, Mom. I'm family. I'm the only one who cares enough to make sure you're taken care of properly. The only one who cares enough. As if anyone who truly cared about me would obviously reach the same conclusions he had. As if disagreeing with his plan meant I didn't care about my own welfare. And if I disagree with your assessment, then I'll have to consider other options. Other options. The phrase sent a chill down my spine. What kind of other options was my son considering for managing his incompetent mother? What other options? Well, if you're not capable of making rational decisions about your own safety and security, there are legal procedures that can help protect you from making harmful choices. Legal procedures. Michael was threatening some kind of legal intervention if I didn't cooperate with his plan. Guardianship proceedings. Competency evaluations. Court orders that would give him legal authority over my life. You're threatening to have me declared incompetent? I'm saying that if you insist on making decisions that put you at risk, I might have to explore legal protections that ensure you get the care you need. Legal protections. Care that I need. Michael was framing potential legal action as protection rather than control, as if forcing me out of my home would be a kindness rather than a violation. That's when I understood the full scope of what my son was planning. This wasn't just about selling the house. This was about taking control of my entire life. My living situation. My financial resources. My decision-making authority. Michael had decided that Robert's death had left me vulnerable and confused. That grief had made me incapable of managing my own affairs. That I needed his protection, whether I wanted it or not. Yashabulanama. What he didn't know was that the woman he was trying to rescue had been making financial decisions he couldn't imagine. That the house he wanted to sell was just one small piece of a property portfolio he'd never heard of. That the confused widow he was planning to move into assisted living owned half the commercial real estate in downtown Millbrook. That the woman who supposedly couldn't handle home maintenance had been buying and renovating properties for 4 decades. Hey, that his mother wasn't a victim who needed rescuing. She was a businesswoman who'd been building wealth while he grew up, assuming his father was the only one in the family who understood money. But I wasn't ready to reveal that information yet. First, I wanted to see exactly how far my son was willing to go with his plan to manage my life without my consent. I wanted to understand the full extent of his assumptions about my capabilities and his rights as my heir. I wanted to give him enough rope to hang himself with his own arrogance and entitlement. "Michael," I said calmly, "I understand you're concerned about my welfare. But I'm not ready to sell the house or move to assisted living. I'd like some time to adjust to life without your father before making major changes." "How much time?" "I don't know, maybe 6 months. Maybe a year." "Mom, that's too long. The housing market could change. Your situation could deteriorate. We need to act while you're still functional." "While you're still functional." As if my functionality was rapidly declining and would soon be completely gone. "I think a year is reasonable," I said. "And what if something happens during that year? What if you fall? What if there's a medical emergency? What if you can't take care of yourself? Then we'll deal with those problems if they arise." "But Mom, it's better to prevent problems than react to them. It's better to make these transitions while you still have choices, rather than waiting until you're forced into emergency decisions. Better to prevent problems. Make transitions while I still have choices." Michael was suggesting that delaying his plan would result in me losing all choice in the matter. That waiting would lead to circumstances where he'd have to make decisions for me whether I liked it or not. The threat was subtle but clear. Cooperate with his timeline or face legal action that would remove my decision-making authority entirely. "I'll take that risk," I said. Michael closed his laptop with more force than necessary. "Mom, you're being stubborn. You're letting emotions cloud your judgment. This isn't about what you want. It's about what you need." "Letting emotions cloud my judgment. This isn't about what you want." Michael was dismissing my preferences as emotional rather than rational. As if any reasonable person would obviously agree with his assessment. It's a judgment. "Maybe we should table this conversation for now," I suggested. "Fine," Michael said. "But I'm not going to drop this, Mom. I care too much about your safety to let you make decisions that could hurt you." "Care too much about your safety." Michael was framing his control as love. His disregard for my preferences as protection. His threats as caring. After he left the kitchen, I sat alone at the table, where Robert and I had shared thousands of meals. Where we'd discussed our dreams, our finances, our plans for the future. Where we'd raised a son who apparently believed that caring about someone meant overriding their autonomy. I thought about the conversation I'd just had. About the assumptions Michael had made. About the future he was planning for me without my input. My son believed that losing Robert had broken something fundamental in me. That grief had damaged my ability to think clearly, that widowhood required supervision and management. He believed that staying in my own home was an irrational emotional decision rather than a practical choice. That managing household affairs was beyond my capabilities. That making my own decisions about my future was dangerous rather than appropriate. Most troubling of all, he believed that his concern for my welfare gave him the right to override my preferences. That love justified control. That caring about someone meant making their decisions for them. Michael had no idea that the woman he was trying to protect had been building wealth and making strategic financial decisions since before he was born. That the house he wanted to sell was the least valuable property in a portfolio he'd never heard of. That his confused mother owned the office building where his own law firm rented space. That the overwhelmed widow he wanted to move to assisted living was his landlord's landlord. But he was about to learn. Because the woman he'd underestimated was about to make a move that would teach him the difference between caring about someone and controlling them. The difference between protecting someone and patronizing them. The difference between being concerned and being entitled. And most importantly, the difference between assuming someone needs your help and discovering that you need theirs. The weekend after our kitchen conversation, Michael's behavior shifted dramatically. He wasn't just staying to help anymore. He was operating like someone who'd already taken charge of my life. Saturday morning, I woke up to find him on the phone in the living room. He was speaking in hushed tones. Professional language. Legal terminology. When he saw me coming down the stairs, he quickly ended the call. "Morning, Mom," he said, sliding his phone into his pocket. "Sleep well? Who are you talking to?" "Just work stuff. You know how it is. Work stuff." On a Saturday morning. In my living room, using the tone people reserve for confidential legal matters. "Michael, was that about me?" "What?" "No, Mom, why would you think that?" The deflection was immediate. Too quick. Too defensive. Michael was lying about something. "Because you were speaking like a lawyer handling a sensitive case." "Mom, I am a lawyer." "That's how I always talk on business calls." "That's how I always talk." But I'd heard Michael on business calls before. This was different. More careful. More secretive. I made coffee and tried to shake off the feeling that my son was planning something behind my back. But throughout the day, small things kept bothering me. Michael was taking notes constantly. Writing down things I said. Observing my behavior like he was documenting something. When I mentioned feeling tired, he wrote it down. When I forgot where I'd left my reading glasses, he made a note. When I mixed up the names of two neighbors while telling a story, he recorded that too. "Michael, why are you writing everything down?" "Just trying to help you stay organized, Mom. Keep track of important information. Stay organized." Keep track of important information. As if I needed secretarial assistance to manage basic daily activities. Sunday brought more strange behavior. Michael spent hours on his laptop in the guest room. When I knocked to ask if he wanted lunch, he quickly closed whatever he'd been working on. "What are you working on up there?" "Research for a client case." "Nothing that would interest you." "Nothing that would interest me." Another deflection. Another lie. Broad. That afternoon, Michael made a suggestion that confirmed my suspicions. "Mom, I think you should come to my office tomorrow. Meet with one of my colleagues, just to discuss some legal planning that might be helpful after Dad's passing." Legal planning. Meet with a colleague. My son wanted me to have a meeting he'd arranged without telling me what it was about. Diecast. What kind of legal planning? Estate stuff, making sure everything's properly organized. Standard procedures after a spouse passes away. Standard procedures. Estate stuff. Michael was being deliberately vague about something that involved lawyers and my legal affairs. Which colleague? Dr. Sarah Chen. She specializes in elder law, very experienced with situations like yours. Elder law. Situations like mine. Michael had arranged for me to meet with a lawyer who specialized in legal issues affecting elderly people. Probably someone who handled competency evaluations and guardianship proceedings. I don't think I need to meet with an elder law attorney. Mom, it's just a consultation. Better to be prepared for potential issues before they become problems. Better to be prepared. Potential issues. Michael was still framing his plan as preventative care rather than active intervention. What potential issues? Well, if something happens to you, we want to make sure there are legal structures in place to handle your affairs properly. If something happens to you, handle your affairs properly. Michael was talking about incapacity planning. Legal arrangements that would give someone else authority over my life if I became unable to make my own decisions. Michael, I haven't had any health problems. I'm not showing signs of dementia. Why do you think something's gonna happen to me? Mom, these things can develop quickly at your age. It's better to have legal protections in place while you're still competent to make those decisions, while you're still competent. My son was suggesting that my competence was temporary. That decline was inevitable and imminent. I'm not interested in meeting with Dr. Chen. Michael's patience finally cracked. Mom, you're being unreasonable. I'm trying to protect you from potential problems, and you're acting like I'm the enemy. Acting like I'm the enemy. As if objecting to his management of my life made me irrational and ungrateful. I'm not acting like anything. I'm telling you, I don't want to meet with a lawyer I've never heard of to discuss legal arrangements I haven't requested. But what if you need those arrangements later? What if there's an emergency and you can't make decisions for yourself? Then we'll deal with that if it happens. Mom, that's not how responsible people handle these situations. Responsible people plan ahead. Responsible people plan ahead. Michael was implying that refusing his plan made me irresponsible, that disagreeing with his timeline showed poor judgment. I think I've been pretty responsible with my life so far. Have you? Because living alone in a house this size at your age, with no support system, seems pretty risky to me. No support system. Living alone seems risky. Michael was characterizing my independent living as dangerous rather than normal. I have friends. I have neighbors. I have community connections. Mom, friends and neighbors aren't the same as family members who can make legal decisions if you become incapacitated. Legal decisions if you become incapacitated. There it was again. Michael's assumption that my incapacity was a when, not an if. That evening, Michael made another phone call. This time he went outside to the back porch. But sound carries through the kitchen window. I could hear fragments of his conversation. Not cooperating with the timeline, showing signs of poor judgment, might need to accelerate the process. Accelerate the process. Michael was discussing some kind of timeline with someone, some kind of process that involved my cooperation, or lack thereof. Hakama. Michael was discussing. I went to bed that night with a sick feeling in my stomach. My son wasn't just concerned about my welfare, he was actively planning something. Something that required legal consultation and careful documentation of my behavior. Monday morning brought confirmation of my worst suspicions. Michael came down to breakfast, dressed in his best suit. Professional demeanor. Legal briefcase in hand. Ready for our appointment, Mom. What appointment? With Dr. Chen. I told you about it yesterday. I told you I wasn't interested in meeting with Dr. Chen. Mom, I already confirmed the appointment. It would be rude to cancel at the last minute. It would be rude to cancel. As if I'd agreed to something I'd explicitly refused. Michael, I never agreed to this meeting. You didn't specifically refuse it either. I thought you'd come around to seeing how important this is. You didn't specifically refuse it. I thought you'd come around. Michael was rewriting our conversation to justify his decision to schedule something against my wishes. I'm not going. Mom, Dr. Chen is expecting us. I've already paid the consultation fee. I've already paid the consultation fee. Michael was using financial pressure to force my compliance. As if money he'd spent gave him the right to override my refusal. Then you'll have to go alone and explain why I'm not there. Mom, this is important. This is about protecting your future security. This is about you taking control of my life without my permission. That's not true. This is about making sure you have legal protections in place. Legal protections. The same phrase he'd used repeatedly. I was beginning to understand that legal protections meant legal arrangements that would give him authority over my decisions. What specific legal protections? Power of attorney. Healthcare directives. Trust arrangements that would protect your assets if you become unable to manage them yourself. Trust arrangements that would protect your assets. Power of attorney. Healthcare directives. Michael wanted me to sign legal documents that would give him control over my medical decisions and financial affairs. And if I don't want to sign those documents, then you'd be leaving yourself vulnerable to exploitation and poor decision-making. Vulnerable to exploitation. Poor decision-making. Michael was suggesting that refusing to give him legal authority would put me at risk. Exploitation by whom? Unscrupulous people who take advantage of elderly individuals who don't have family protection. Family protection. As if the only way to protect myself from exploitation was to give my son legal control over my life. Michael, the only person pressuring me to sign legal documents right now is you. I'm not pressuring you. I'm encouraging you to make smart decisions about your future. Encouraging you to make smart decisions. As if there was only one smart decision and it happened to be the one that benefited him. I think I'll make my own decisions about legal arrangements. Mom, you're not thinking clearly about this. Grief affects judgment. You need objective advice from professionals who understand elder law. Grief affects judgment. Objective advice from professionals. Michael was back to suggesting that I wasn't competent to evaluate my own legal needs. That's when I made a decision that would change everything. Michael, I want you to leave. What? I want you to pack your things and leave my house. Mom, you don't mean that. You're upset because you don't understand what I'm trying to do for you. You don't understand what I'm trying to do for you. Even when I was explicitly telling him to leave, Michael was dismissing my words as confusion rather than intention. I understand perfectly. You're trying to take control of my life by claiming I'm not competent to make my own decisions. That's not what I'm doing. Then what would you call scheduling legal appointments without my consent? Taking notes on my behavior? Documenting everything I say like you're building a case? I'm trying to help you plan for contingencies. You're trying to manufacture evidence that I need a guardian. Mom, that's ridiculous. I would never. Get out. Mom. Get out of my house. The words echoed through the kitchen. 46 years of accumulated frustration with being underestimated. Decades of having my intelligence questioned and my capabilities dismissed. The rage of discovering that my own son viewed me as a problem to be managed rather than a person to be respected. Michael stood frozen for a moment. He'd never heard me raise my voice like that. Never seen me assert authority so forcefully. Never been on the receiving end of anger he couldn't dismiss as emotional instability. Mom, you're making a mistake. You need help whether you want to admit it or not. The only mistake I made was trusting you to respect my autonomy. Fine, Michael said, his mask finally slipping completely. But don't come crying to me when you can't handle living here alone. Don't call me when something goes wrong and you realize you need help. Don't come crying to me. Don't call me when you need help. My son's true feelings were finally showing. His concern had been conditional on my compliance. His help came with strings attached. I won't. And don't expect me to clean up the mess when your poor decision-making creates problems you can't solve. Your poor decision-making. Problems you can't solve. Even while leaving, Michael was predicting my failure and positioning himself as the only solution. I'll manage just fine. We'll see about that. Michael packed his things with theatrical anger, slamming drawers, banging suitcases, making noise that was designed to demonstrate his displeasure and make me feel guilty about my decision. Ishad Patterhis, he loaded his car, he made one final attempt to regain control. Mom, I'm going to leave my number with Mrs. Patterson next door. When you realize you need help, call her and she'll contact me. When you realize you need help. Not if. When. Michael was so confident that I would fail without his management that he was already arranging for neighbors to facilitate my inevitable surrender. I won't need help. You will. And when you do, I hope you remember that I tried to help you before it became a crisis. I tried to help you before it became a crisis. Michael was reframing his attempted control as preventative assistance, as if my refusal to cooperate would create the problems he'd been warning about. I watched him drive away from the window of the house he'd wanted to sell. The house he'd assumed was too much for me to handle. The house that was about to become the least of his concerns when he discovered what his mother actually owned. Because Michael had no idea that the woman he'd just dismissed as an incompetent burden controlled more property than he'd ever seen in his lifetime. That the confused widow he'd tried to manipulate owned the building where his law firm paid rent. That the mother he'd underestimated was about to become his biggest problem. He thought he was leaving behind a helpless elderly woman who would soon realize she needed his protection. He was actually leaving behind a woman who was about to demonstrate just how expensive it could be to underestimate someone. A woman who'd been building wealth and acquiring properties while he grew up, assuming his father was the only one in the family who understood business. A woman who'd been making strategic financial decisions since before he was born, held to himself. A woman who was about to teach him that respect isn't optional in family relationships, that love doesn't justify control, that caring about someone doesn't give you the right to override their autonomy. But first, I needed to make some phone calls. To lawyers who specialized in trust law rather than elder abuse. To property managers who could implement some immediate changes. To financial advisors who could help me structure my assets in ways that would prevent future manipulation attempts. Because Michael had taught me something important during his week-long visit. He'd shown me that my son viewed my grief as an opportunity rather than a loss. My widowhood as vulnerability rather than transition. My independence as stubbornness rather than strength. So is something as he'd shown Jack and die. He'd revealed that he saw me as a resource to be managed rather than a person to be respected. An inheritance to be protected rather than a mother to be loved. A problem to be solved rather than a family member to be supported. And he demonstrated that he was willing to use legal pressure and emotional manipulation to get what he wanted from someone he assumed was too weak to resist. That was information I could use. Information that would help me make decisions about how to structure my legacy and who deserved to benefit from the wealth I'd spent decades accumulating. Information that would help me decide whether my son had earned the inheritance he was already counting on, or whether that inheritance should go to someone who understood the difference between caring and controlling. Someone who knew that love means respecting people's choices rather than overriding them, that family means supporting people's decisions rather than manipulating them, that concern means offering help rather than imposing management. Michael thought he was protecting his inheritance by forcing me into assisted living and taking control of my assets. He was actually destroying his inheritance by showing me exactly what kind of person he'd become. A person who viewed elderly family members as problems to be managed rather than people to be respected. A person who used love as justification for control. A person who assumed that grief made someone incompetent rather than simply sad. A person who had no idea that his mother had been building an empire while he was building assumptions about her helplessness. But he was about to learn. Because the woman he'd just dismissed as confused and overwhelmed was about to make some moves that would change his life forever. Moves that would teach him the difference between being concerned about someone and being entitled to control them. Between offering help and demanding compliance. Between protecting someone and patronizing them. Most importantly, moves that would show him that underestimating a 74-year-old woman could be the most expensive mistake of his legal career. The phone calls I was about to make would ensure that Michael learned those lessons the hard way. Through consequences that would last longer than his assumptions about my incompetence. Through changes that would make him understand exactly what he'd lost when he chose control over respect. Manipulation over love. Entitlement over earning. The education was about to begin, and it would be more expensive than any law school Michael had ever attended. Nachashi Naus, the silence in the house after Michael left was profound. For the first time in a week I could think clearly. No note-taking. No suspicious phone calls. No constant evaluation of my every word and action. I made myself a cup of tea and sat in Robert's favorite chair. The leather was still shaped to his body. Still smelled faintly of his cologne. For 46 years this had been our evening ritual. Robert in his chair, me on the sofa, discussing our days. Now I sat alone, processing what had just happened with our son. The son we'd raised with love and financial security. The son who'd grown up to view his mother as a problem requiring management. Michael had shown me something crucial during his visit. He didn't just think I was incompetent. He was actively working to prove it. The note-taking, the documented observations, the elder law attorney consultation. These weren't random acts of concern. They were building blocks in a legal strategy. My phone rang. Mrs. Patterson from next door. Eleanor? I just saw Michael leaving with suitcases. Is everything all right? Everything's fine, Carol. Michael finished helping me with some paperwork and headed home. He stopped by earlier this week, asked me to keep an eye on you, said you might need assistance with things around the house. Keep an eye on me, need assistance. Michael had been recruiting neighbors to monitor my behavior, building a network of concerned observers who could testify about my declining capabilities. That was thoughtful of him. He also left his number, said to call if I noticed anything concerning about your welfare. Anything concerning about your welfare. Michael had essentially asked my neighbor to document signs of my incompetence. Carol, have you noticed anything concerning? Of course not, dear. You've always been sharp as a tack. But Michael seemed quite worried about you living alone. Quite worried about you living alone, Michael had been planting seeds of concern with neighbors, creating a narrative about my vulnerability and need for supervision. I appreciate you checking on me. After hanging up, I realized the scope of Michael's plan was larger than I'd initially understood. He hadn't just been documenting my behavior for his own records. He'd been building a case that involved multiple witnesses who could testify about his concerns for my welfare. This wasn't impulsive worry about an aging mother. This was systematic preparation for legal proceedings that would give him authority over my life. The sacrament. I walked through my house with new eyes. The house Michael wanted to sell for $400,000. The house he viewed as too much responsibility for an elderly widow to manage alone. What Michael didn't know was that this house was the least valuable asset in my portfolio. That the property he wanted to liquidate represented about 10% of my real estate holdings. That his mother owned 12 rental properties in 3 different states. That she controlled commercial real estate worth more than $3 million. That she'd been building wealth through strategic property investments for 4 decades. But to understand how I'd built that wealth, you need to know my story. The story Michael had never bothered to learn because he'd assumed his father was the only one in our family who understood business. My name is Eleanor Hartwell. I was born Eleanor Sullivan in 1949 in a small apartment above my family's grocery store in downtown Millbrook. My parents, James and Catherine Sullivan, owned Sullivan's Market, a modest operation that served the working-class neighborhood where we lived. Growing up in that store taught me lessons about money that most children never learn. I watched my parents negotiate with suppliers, saw them calculate profit margins on every item they sold, learned that successful businesses required careful attention to numbers and strategic thinking about long-term sustainability. Eleanor, my father would say as I helped him with inventory, money doesn't grow on trees, but property does grow in value if you're smart about what you buy and when you sell it. Property grows in value. Those words shaped everything I would accomplish later in life. My father had purchased the building that housed our store and apartment in 1945. Bought it for $800 when downtown Millbrook was considered undesirable real estate. By the time I was 10 years old, that building was worth over $3,000. See that, Eleanor? My father said, showing me the property assessment. We didn't just buy a place to live and work. We bought an investment that pays us rent and grows in value. An investment that pays rent and grows in value. I was 12 years old when I understood that real estate could be more than shelter. It could be a wealth-building tool. My parents encouraged my interest in business and property. When other girls my age were learning to cook and sew, I was learning to read financial statements and calculate return on investment. Eleanor's got a head for numbers, my mother would tell neighbors. She'll do something important with that brain of hers. Something important with that brain. My mother understood that intelligence was only valuable if you applied it to opportunities that mattered. When I graduated high school in 1967, I had 2 choices: work in the family store or pursue higher education. My parents couldn't afford college tuition, but they supported my decision to apply for scholarships. I earned a partial scholarship to study business at the state university, enough to cover tuition, but not room and board. So I lived at home and commuted 40 minutes each way to attend classes. The business program taught me accounting principles and marketing strategies, but the most valuable education came from working in my parents' store during evenings and weekends. Real-world application of financial concepts I was learning in textbooks. By my junior year, I was helping my parents expand their operation. We added a deli counter, increased our produce selection, started staying open later to serve customers who worked traditional business hours. Eleanor, my father said when our annual revenue increased by 30%, you've got a natural understanding of what customers want and how to give it to them profitably. Natural understanding of profitable customer service. That skill would prove crucial when I started building my own business portfolio. I graduated college in 1971 with a degree in business administration and a job offer from Millbrook First National Bank. Entry-level position in their commercial lending department. Salary of $4,200 per year. It wasn't a fortune, but it was steady income that would allow me to start implementing investment strategies I'd been planning since high school. The bank job taught me how successful people borrowed money to buy property, how leverage could accelerate wealth building, how to evaluate real estate investments from a lender's perspective. More importantly, it showed me properties that were available for purchase. Foreclosed homes, commercial buildings with motivated sellers. Investment opportunities that never appeared in newspaper listings. "Miss Sullivan," my supervisor said after I'd been working for 6 months, "you ask more questions about our loan portfolio than any employee we've ever had." I asked questions because I was learning. Every loan file told a story about someone's financial strategy. Every foreclosure revealed mistakes I could avoid. Every successful property investment provided lessons I could apply. In 1972, I used my savings to purchase my first rental property. A small duplex 3 blocks from my parents' store. Purchase price, $6,000. Down payment, $1,200. Monthly rent from both units, $140. The mortgage payment was $95 per month. After taxes and maintenance, the property generated $20 in monthly profit. Not much, but it was positive cash flow and equity building. "Eleanor," my father said when I showed him the purchase documents, "you're 23 years old and you already own income-producing real estate. That's impressive." Income-producing real estate. The foundation of wealth that would eventually control Michael's future. Over the next 3 years, I bought 2 more small properties. Used the rental income to qualify for larger loans. Reinvested profits into additional down payments. By 1975, I owned 4 rental units, generating over $300 in monthly net income. That's when I met Robert Hartwell. Robert was 3 years older than me. A recent medical school graduate who'd accepted a residency position at Millbrook General Hospital. He'd come to the bank seeking a loan to purchase a house. "Miss Sullivan," he said during our loan consultation, "I need to buy something quickly. The hospital requires residents to live within 10 minutes of the facility." I reviewed Robert's financial situation. Medical school debt, $48,000. Residency salary, $12,000 per year. Credit history, excellent but limited. Under normal circumstances, Robert wouldn't have qualified for a mortgage. Too much debt relative to income. But I saw something in his file that my colleagues missed. Robert was going to be a doctor. His income would increase dramatically once he completed residency and started practicing medicine. His medical school debt was an investment in future earning capacity, not a burden that would prevent success. "Dr. Hartwell," I said, "I think we can structure a loan that works for your situation." I helped Robert get approved for a mortgage that other lenders had rejected. Found him a small house that met his needs and budget. Walked him through the purchase process with patience and expertise. Fies in tutti. 6 months later, Robert asked me to dinner. "Eleanor," he said over coffee after our meal, "I wanted to thank you for helping me buy my house. But more than that, I wanted to tell you that I've never met a woman who understands finance the way you do. Never met a woman who understands finance." Robert wasn't intimidated by my business knowledge. He was impressed by it. We started dating seriously in the spring of 1976. Robert was finishing his residency. I was expanding my rental property portfolio. We were both ambitious people who understood the value of hard work and strategic planning. "Despaired." "Eleanor," Robert said one evening as we walked through downtown Millbrook, "what do you want to accomplish in the next 10 years? "Financial independence," I said without hesitation. "I want to own enough property to live comfortably without depending on employment income." "How much property would that require?" Probably 20 units. Maybe 25. Enough to generate $1,500 per month in net rental income. 25 rental units. $1,500 monthly income. Robert didn't laugh at my ambitious goals. He asked how he could help me achieve them. What if we got married, he said 6 months later. Combined our incomes and credit capacity to accelerate your investment timeline. Combined our incomes and credit capacity. Robert understood that marriage could be a financial partnership, as well as an emotional one. We were married in June 1977 in a small ceremony at St. Mark's Episcopal Church. I wore my mother's wedding dress. Robert wore a suit he'd borrowed from his brother. The reception was held in the fellowship hall, with food prepared by my mother and her sisters. It wasn't elaborate or expensive, but it was the beginning of a partnership that would build more wealth than either of us imagined possible. Our honeymoon was a weekend at a lake cottage that Robert's uncle owned. We couldn't afford an expensive trip, but we spent those 3 days planning our financial future with the same care that other couples planned their dream vacations. "Eleanor," Robert said as we sat on the dock watching the sunset, "I want you to keep buying properties. I'll handle the down payments. You handle the management and growth strategy. I'll handle the down payments. You handle the management." Robert was proposing a division of labor that played to our respective strengths. When we returned from our honeymoon, we sat down at our kitchen table and created a 5-year plan. Robert would focus on building his medical practice. I would focus on building our real estate portfolio. Together, we would accelerate wealth accumulation through strategic use of his increasing income and my property management expertise. By 1980, we owned 8 rental properties. By 1982, we owned 15. By 1985, we owned 23 properties, generating over $2,000 in monthly net income. But 1985 also brought an opportunity that would transform our modest rental portfolio into something much larger. Downtown Millbrook was beginning to attract commercial development. Property values were increasing. Zoning was changing to allow mixed-use buildings. "Eleanor," Robert said one evening as we reviewed our financial statements, "what if we stopped buying small rental houses and started buying commercial buildings?" Commercial buildings. Properties that could generate much higher rental income than residential units. Hey, I spent weeks researching commercial real estate markets, learning about office building management, understanding retail lease structures, calculating the potential returns from commercial properties versus residential investments. The numbers were compelling. A small office building could generate as much rental income as 5 or 6 houses. Commercial tenants typically signed longer leases and maintained their own properties. The profit margins were significantly higher. In November 1985, we purchased our first commercial property, a 3-story office building in downtown Millbrook. Purchase price, $120,000. Annual rental income, $18,000. "Eleanor," Robert said after we closed on the building, "this single property generates more income than our first 10 rental houses combined. More income than our first 10 houses." Commercial real estate was a game changer that would define the next phase of our wealth building strategy. Over the next decade, we gradually sold our residential rental properties and reinvested the proceeds into commercial buildings. By 1995, we owned 4 office buildings, 2 retail complexes, and a small warehouse that we leased to local businesses. Our monthly rental income exceeded $8,000. Our net worth had grown to over $1.2 million. We had achieved financial independence through strategic property investments and careful leverage management. But Robert and I kept our success private. We lived in the same modest house, drove reliable but not luxurious cars, took simple vacations, and avoided conspicuous consumption. "Eleanor," Robert would say when neighbors asked about our lifestyle, "wealth is what you accumulate, not what you display. Wealth is what you accumulate." That philosophy kept our success invisible to people who assumed that wealthy individuals always lived ostentatiously, including our son Michael. Michael grew up knowing that his parents were comfortable but not understanding the scope of our financial success. He saw us make responsible spending decisions and assumed we had limited resources. He watched us prioritize investments over luxury purchases and concluded that we were financially conservative rather than financially sophisticated. Mom and Dad are pretty frugal, Michael would tell his friends. They don't spend money on fancy stuff. Maya, Eeyore, they were Siths. Pretty frugal. Don't spend money on fancy stuff. Michael interpreted our strategic spending as financial limitation rather than financial discipline. When Michael graduated law school in 2001, Robert and I offered to help him start his practice. We provided the down payment for his office building, co-signed his equipment loans, helped him establish credit relationships with vendors and suppliers. But we structured that assistance as business investments rather than gifts. Michael paid market rate rent for his office space, repaid his equipment loans with interest, maintained professional relationships with our property management company. "Why are Mom and Dad charging me rent?" Michael asked Robert one day. Most parents would let their son use office space for free. Most parents would let their son use space for free. Michael expected family assistance without business accountability. Because, Robert explained, successful business relationships maintain professional standards even between family members. Professional standards even between family members. Robert was teaching Michael that mixing family and business required clear boundaries and mutual respect. But Michael never fully understood that lesson. He saw our business approach as evidence that we had limited resources to share, rather than unlimited resources that required careful management. He never learned that the office building where he rented space was owned by a trust we'd established. That the equipment loans he repaid were serviced by a bank where we maintained significant investment accounts. That his business success was built on a foundation of family wealth he'd never recognized. Michael had no idea that his parents owned commercial real estate throughout the region, that we controlled property worth millions of dollars, that our monthly rental income exceeded most people's annual salaries. Nimwate. He saw us as comfortable retirees living on medical practice savings and Social Security benefits. Frugal seniors who'd accumulated modest wealth through careful spending and conservative investments. Which is exactly what we wanted him to see. Because Robert and I had learned that family wealth could create entitlement and dependency if it wasn't managed carefully. We wanted Michael to build his own success before he learned about the resources he would eventually inherit. We wanted him to develop character and work ethic based on his own efforts, rather than our support. To understand the value of earned success rather than inherited privilege. But Michael's behavior during the week after Robert's funeral showed us something troubling. Our son hadn't developed the character we'd hoped to see. Instead, he'd developed assumptions about his inheritance and entitlement to manage our resources. He'd grown into someone who viewed elderly family members as problems requiring management rather than people deserving respect. Someone who used legal pressure and emotional manipulation to get what he wanted from people he assumed were too weak to resist. Someone who had no idea that the mother he was trying to control owned the building where his law firm paid rent. That the woman he wanted to move into assisted living was his landlord's landlord. But he was about to learn, because the phone calls I was about to make would change everything he thought he knew about his mother's capabilities and resources. Changes that would teach him the difference between earning respect and demanding compliance. Between offering help and imposing control. Between being concerned about someone and being entitled to manage them. The education was about to begin, and it would be more comprehensive than any law school curriculum Michael had ever studied. The first phone call I made after Michael left was to my attorney, Patricia Caldwell. Patricia had been handling our family's legal affairs for 15 years. She knew exactly how much wealth Robert and I had accumulated. She also knew how carefully we'd structured our assets to prevent exactly the kind of manipulation Michael was attempting. "Eleanor," Patricia said when I explained what had happened, "I'm not surprised, but I am disappointed. Michael's behavior suggests he's been planning this for some time. How can you tell?" The elder law consultation, the documented observations, the neighbor recruitment. These aren't spontaneous acts of concern. They're strategic steps in a competency challenge. Competency challenge, the legal term for what Michael had been building toward. Could he actually succeed? Not based on what you've described. You're clearly competent and capable. But competency proceedings can be expensive and emotionally devastating, even when they fail. Expensive and emotionally devastating. Michael was willing to put me through legal trauma to get control of assets he didn't even know existed. What are my options? We can be proactive. Make some changes to your trust structures that would eliminate Michael's ability to challenge your decision-making authority. Changes to trust structures. Patricia was suggesting legal arrangements that would protect my assets from Michael's interference. What kind of changes? Transfer control of your major assets to irrevocable trusts. Establish clear succession plans that don't depend on family relationships. Create legal barriers that would prevent anyone from claiming you're incompetent to manage your own affairs. Irrevocable trusts. Clear succession plans. Legal barriers. Patricia was proposing a complete restructuring of my estate planning to address Michael's threat. How quickly can we implement these changes? If you're serious about this, we can have new documents drafted and executed within a week. Within a week. Fast enough to stay ahead of whatever legal strategy Michael was planning. I'm serious. Let's schedule a meeting for tomorrow. After hanging up with Patricia, I made my second call. To James Morrison, my property manager and business partner for the past 20 years. James handled day-to-day operations for most of my commercial properties. He also knew about investments that even Robert hadn't been fully aware of. Eleanor, James said, I'm sorry for your loss. Robert was a good man and a smart investor. Thank you, James. I'm calling because I need to make some immediate changes to our property management arrangements. What kind of changes? I want to review all lease agreements that involve family members. Starting with Michael's office space. Michael's office space. James managed the building where Michael's law firm rented their offices. Michael had no idea that his monthly rent payments were going to his mother. Is there a problem with Michael's lease? Michael is trying to have me declared incompetent so he can take control of my assets. James was quiet for a moment. That's problematic. It's about to become more problematic. I want you to prepare a lease termination notice for Michael's firm. Eleanor, are you sure about this? Michael has been a reliable tenant for 8 years. Michael has been a reliable tenant who's trying to steal from his landlord. Yes, I'm sure. What grounds do you want me to use for termination? Review his lease agreement. Find the standard cause provisions. I'm sure we can identify something. Standard cause provisions. Every commercial lease included clauses that allowed termination for various violations. James would find something. I'll review the file and get back to you. My third call was to Rebecca, my daughter. Rebecca lived in Chicago where she worked as a social worker. She'd always been closer to me than Michael was, more interested in family relationships than family assets. Mom, Rebecca said when she answered, how are you holding up? I've been worried about you since the funeral. I'm doing better than expected, but I need to tell you about something that happened with Michael. I explained Michael's visit. His attempt to force me into assisted living. His documentation of my behavior. His recruitment of neighbors to monitor my activities. Mom, that's horrible. Michael had no right to make those kinds of plans without consulting you. Unfortunately, he thinks he has every right. He's convinced that grief has made me incompetent. Have you told him that's not true? I kicked him out of the house. Rebecca laughed. Good for you. Michael has always been controlling, but this sounds extreme even for him. Rebecca, there's something else you need to know. Something about our family's financial situation that Michael doesn't understand. What do you mean? Your father and I built a much larger estate than Michael realizes. We own commercial properties worth several $1 million. Several $1 million? Mom, I had no idea. We kept our wealth private. We wanted you and Michael to build your own success before learning about potential inheritances. But Michael thinks you're struggling financially. Michael thinks I'm a confused widow living on Social Security and small savings. And he's trying to take control of assets he doesn't know exist? Exactly. Rebecca was quiet for a moment. Mom, what are you going to do? I'm going to teach your brother that respect isn't optional in family relationships. How? By showing him exactly what he's trying to control. And exactly what he's going to lose by treating me like an incompetent burden. Mom, Be careful. Michael can be vindictive when he doesn't get his way. Rebecca, your brother has no idea who he's dealing with. After talking to Rebecca, I spent the evening reviewing financial documents that Michael had never seen. Property deeds, trust agreements, investment statements, lease contracts. The paper trail of wealth accumulation that had taken 4 decades to build. By bedtime, I had a complete picture of my financial position. The scope of resources that Michael was trying to control through legal manipulation. Total real estate value, $3.8 million. Monthly rental income, $24,000. Liquid investments, $1.2 million. Annual income from all sources, $340,000. Michael wanted to sell my house for $400,000 and use the proceeds to pay for assisted living that cost $3,000 per month. He was planning to liquidate the least valuable asset in a portfolio worth over $5 million. More ironically, his law firm paid $4,200 monthly rent for office space in a building I owned. Michael was generating income for the mother he wanted to declare incompetent. He was literally paying rent to the woman he assumed was financially helpless. The next morning, I met with Patricia to begin restructuring my estate. We spent 3 hours reviewing trust documents and asset transfer strategies. Eleanor, Patricia said, I recommend establishing 3 separate irrevocable trusts. 1 for your commercial properties, 1 for your liquid investments, 1 for personal assets like your house, 3 separate trusts. Legal structures that would prevent anyone from claiming control over my assets. Who would manage these trusts? Professional trustees. Bank trust departments or independent fiduciaries who have legal obligations to follow your instructions rather than family preferences. Professional trustees rather than family members. Managers who couldn't be manipulated or pressured by family dynamics. What about inheritance arrangements? We can structure the trusts to provide income for your lifetime, then distribute assets according to your wishes after your death. Distribute assets according to my wishes. Not according to family expectations or legal assumptions about who deserved what. I want Rebecca to inherit the commercial properties. She's shown respect for my autonomy and decision-making. And Michael? I thought about my son's behavior over the past week, his assumption that I was incompetent, his willingness to use legal pressure to get what he wanted, his complete disregard for my preferences about my own life. Ibilias, Kalias. Michael will inherit my personal residence. Nothing else. Eleanor, that's a significant difference in inheritance value. Michael has shown me that he views family relationships as opportunities for control rather than connections based on love and respect. Are you sure about this decision? I'm sure. People who try to steal from you don't deserve to inherit from you. What if Michael challenges these arrangements? He can try. But it's hard to challenge trust structures that were created while the settler was obviously competent and working with experienced legal counsel. Obviously competent and working with experienced legal counsel. Patricia was creating documentation that would prove my mental capacity at the time these decisions were made. How long will it take to complete the transfers? 2 weeks for the legal documents. Another month to transfer property deeds and retitle assets. 6 weeks total. Fast enough to protect my assets before Michael could implement whatever legal strategy he was planning. That afternoon, James called with news about Michael's lease situation. Eleanor, I found several lease violations in Michael's file. What kind of violations? He's modified the office layout without written permission. Added electrical outlets that weren't approved. Installed security equipment that wasn't disclosed. Lease violations that justified termination. Michael had been careless about following the terms of his rental agreement. How much notice are we required to give? 30 days for cure or quit. 60 days if he doesn't remedy the violations. 30 days to fix the problems or 60 days to vacate. Either way, Michael would be looking for new office space within 2 months. Send the notice today. Eleanor, are you sure you want to terminate his lease? This could damage your relationship permanently. Michael damaged our relationship when he decided to treat me like an incompetent burden. I'm just responding to his business practices as a landlord would. Because that's what I was, Michael's landlord. The property owner he'd been paying rent to while planning to have me declared incompetent? The irony was perfect. Michael was generating income for the woman he assumed was financially helpless. He was literally funding the wealth he wanted to control. That evening, Michael called. His first contact since leaving my house 3 days earlier. "Mom, I got a strange notice in the mail today. Something about lease violations at my office." "What kind of notice?" "A cure or quit notice from my property management company. They're claiming I made unauthorized modifications to my office space." Unauthorized modifications. The lease violations James had discovered in Michael's file. "Have you made unauthorized modifications?" "Just minor changes. Added some electrical outlets. Upgraded the security system. Nothing major." Nothing major. Michael had violated his lease agreement multiple times without seeking proper approvals. "Did you get permission from the property owner before making these changes?" "Mom, it's just electrical work and security equipment. Most landlords don't care about minor improvements that add value to their property." Most landlords don't care, but Michael didn't know who his actual landlord was. "Here. What are you going to do about the notice?" "I'll probably call the property management company and explain the situation. Maybe offer to get retroactive approval for the modifications." Retroactive approval. Michael was hoping to negotiate his way out of lease violations rather than following proper procedures. What if they won't accept retroactive approval? Then I'll have to find a new office. But that would be a huge disruption to my practice. Moving costs, new stationery, client notifications. It could cost me thousands of dollars. Thousands of dollars. Michael was beginning to understand that his careless attitude toward business relationships could have expensive consequences. "Maybe you should have gotten permission before making modifications." "Mom, you're acting like this is my fault. These are reasonable business improvements that benefit everyone." Acting like this is your fault. Michael still couldn't accept responsibility for violating his lease agreement. Lease agreements exist for good reasons. Property owners have the right to control what happens in their buildings. "Mom, you're taking the landlord's side over your own son's." Taking the landlord's side. Michael had no idea that I was the landlord's side. "I'm taking the side of people who follow proper business procedures." "Fine. But if I have to move my office because of this ridiculous lease dispute, don't expect me to help you when you finally realize you need assistance managing your own affairs. Don't expect me to help you." Michael was withdrawing his offer of help as punishment for my failure to support his lease violation dispute. "I'll manage my own affairs just fine." "We'll see about that." Michael hung up without saying goodbye. His anger was predictable. He'd assumed I would automatically support his position against his landlord. When I refused to take his side, he decided I was ungrateful and difficult. What Michael didn't understand was that I wasn't taking anyone's side. I was simply being consistent about business relationships and legal obligations. The same consistency I was applying to his attempted manipulation of my personal life. Michael wanted to use legal pressure to control my living situation and financial decisions. But he was unwilling to follow legal requirements in his own business relationships. He expected family loyalty to override business principles when it benefited him, but he was perfectly willing to use legal strategies against family members when it served his interests. Their pretties is insring. That kind of selective application of rules and relationships was exactly why Michael was about to lose the inheritance he'd been counting on. People who manipulate others don't deserve to benefit from the wealth those others have accumulated. People who use legal threats against family members shouldn't be surprised when family members respond with legal strategies of their own. Michael was about to learn that underestimating someone can be a very expensive mistake, especially when that someone owns the building where you work and controls the inheritance you assume is guaranteed. The education was accelerating, and it was going to cost Michael much more than thousands of dollars in moving expenses. It was going to cost him millions of dollars in inheritance that he'd assumed was his by right rather than by earning. Because respect isn't inherited. It's earned through consistent behavior over time. And Michael had just shown me exactly what kind of behavior he considered acceptable in family relationships. Behavior that disqualified him from inheriting wealth he'd never helped build and didn't deserve to control. The woman he'd tried to manipulate was about to become the woman who changed his life forever. Not through kindness and generosity, but through consequences that matched his character. Michael wanted to control assets he'd never earned. Instead, he was going to lose assets he'd always assumed were his. Tamasahua, the lesson was about to begin, and it would last longer than any legal proceeding he'd ever been involved in. Kasahua batamanapi. 2 weeks after restructuring my estate, Patricia called with news that changed everything. Eleanor, Michael filed a petition for guardianship this morning. My son had actually done it. Despite my clear competence and explicit refusal to cooperate with his plans, he was trying to have me declared legally incompetent. What are his grounds? He claims you're showing signs of dementia, that you're making irrational financial decisions, that you're isolating yourself from family support. Irrational financial decisions. Isolating from family support. Michael was using my refusal to sell my house and my decision to kick him out as evidence of mental decline. He's also submitted statements from neighbors expressing concern about your welfare. Statements from neighbors. Michael had successfully recruited Mrs. Patterson and others to support his case. What did the neighbors say? That you seem confused about household management. That you've become hostile toward family members trying to help. That your behavior has changed significantly since Robert's death. Confused about household management. Hostile toward family members. Changed behavior. Michael had coached neighbors to frame normal grief responses as signs of incompetence. How strong is his case? Legally? Very weak. But guardianship proceedings can be emotionally devastating even when they fail. How long do we have? The court scheduled a preliminary hearing for next Friday. You'll need to appear and demonstrate your competence. Next Friday. 7 days to prepare for a legal battle with my own son. Patricia, I want to do more than just defend myself. I want to go on the offense. What do you mean? I want Michael to understand exactly what he's attacking. Exactly what he's about to lose. Eleanor, what are you thinking? I want to reveal my actual financial situation during the hearing. Show the court that Michael is trying to control assets he doesn't even know exist. That would certainly demonstrate your competence. But it would also shock Michael. Good. He needs to be shocked. Are you sure about this approach? Michael chose to make our family conflict a matter of public record. Now he gets to learn about my private wealth in front of a judge. Friday morning arrived gray and cold. October weather that matched my mood as I drove to the courthouse. Patricia met me in the parking lot. Are you ready for this? I've been ready for this my whole life. The courtroom was smaller than I'd expected. Michael sat at the petitioner's table with his attorney, a woman I didn't recognize. He looked confident. Prepared. Like someone who expected to win easily. Judge Harrison called the case to order. Michael's attorney stood first. Your Honor, we're here because Eleanor Hartwell is no longer capable of managing her own affairs. Since her husband's death 6 weeks ago, Mrs. Hartwell has shown clear signs of cognitive decline and poor judgment. Clear signs of cognitive decline. Poor judgment. Michael's lawyer was presenting his assumptions as established facts. What evidence supports these claims? Judge Harrison asked. Mrs. Hartwell refuses to consider appropriate housing for someone her age. She's rejected family assistance with financial planning. She's become hostile toward relatives trying to help her transition to a safer living situation. Refuses appropriate housing. Rejected family assistance. Hostile toward relatives. Every decision I'd made to maintain my independence was being framed as evidence of incompetence. We have statements from concerned neighbors documenting Mrs. Hartwell's declining condition. Michael's attorney submitted the neighbor statements. Mrs. Patterson's concern about my living alone. Another neighbor's observation about my confusion during a brief conversation. A third neighbor's worry about my social isolation. Social isolation. Because I preferred privacy to neighborhood gossip. We also have documentation of Mrs. Hartwell's irrational behavior toward family members attempting to provide assistance. Irrational behavior. Michael's notes about my refusal to meet with the elder law attorney. his documentation of my emotional outbursts when he suggested assisted living. Your Honor, Mrs. Hartwell clearly needs protection from her own poor decision-making. My client is requesting limited guardianship to ensure his mother receives appropriate care. Limited guardianship. Legal authority to override my decisions about housing, medical care, and financial management. Mr. Hartwell, Judge Harrison said, please tell the court about your specific concerns regarding your mother's welfare. Michael stood up. Professional demeanor. Concerned expression. The performance of a devoted son worried about his aging mother. Your Honor, my mother is 74 years old. 6 weeks ago, my father died after a long illness. Since then, my mother has been struggling to accept the reality of her changed circumstances. Struggling to accept reality. Changed circumstances. Michael was framing normal grief as cognitive impairment. She's living alone in a large house that's too much for her to maintain. She's rejected suggestions about moving to a safer environment. She's refused to discuss financial planning that would ensure her long-term security. Too much for her to maintain. Refused to discuss financial planning. Michael was presenting my autonomous decision-making as evidence of incapacity. Most concerning, Your Honor, my mother has become hostile toward family members who are trying to help her. She's accused me of attempting to control her life when I'm simply trying to ensure her safety and welfare. Hostile toward family members. Accused me of control. Michael was reframing his manipulation attempts as caring assistance that I was too confused to appreciate. Your Honor, I love my mother. I want what's best for her. But she's not capable of making rational decisions about her own welfare right now. I love my mother. Want what's best. Not capable of rational decisions. The perfect performance of filial concern masking attempted financial control. Judge Harrison turned to me. Mrs. Hartwell, how do you respond to these allegations? I stood up slowly, deliberately, with the confidence of someone who'd been preparing for this moment her entire life. Your Honor, my son believes I'm incompetent because I refuse to let him control my life. He wants me declared incapable because I wouldn't agree to sell my house and move to assisted living. The judge nodded. Please continue. Michael has no idea what he's trying to control. He doesn't understand my actual financial situation. He doesn't know about the wealth I've spent 40 years accumulating. Michael's face changed. The confident expression flickered. Something like uncertainty crossed his features. Your Honor, I'd like to present evidence of my competence and financial sophistication. Patricia handed me a folder containing financial statements and property documents. Your Honor, I own 12 commercial properties in 3 states. My real estate portfolio is valued at $3.8 million. I generate $24,000 in monthly rental income. $24,000 monthly. Michael's eyes widened. His attorney looked confused. I also maintain investment accounts worth $1.2 million. My annual income from all sources exceeds $340,000. $340,000 annually. More than Michael earned from his law practice. Your Honor, does this sound like someone who's financially incompetent? Judge Harrison reviewed my financial statements. Mrs. Hartwell, how long have you been managing these investments? 43 years, Your Honor. I started buying rental properties when I was 23 years old. And your son was unaware of these assets? Completely unaware. Michael assumed I was living on Social Security and small savings. Michael stood up abruptly. Your Honor, I had no idea. Mr. Hartwell, please sit down. Judge Harrison's voice was sharp. I continued my testimony. Your Honor, there's something else the court should know. Michael's law firm rents office space in a building I own. Michael's face went white. His attorney whispered something urgently in his ear. For 8 years, Michael has been paying $4,200 monthly rent to a property management company that works for me. He's been generating income for the mother he claims is financially incompetent. $4,200 monthly. Michael was literally funding the wealth he wanted to control. Your Honor, last week I received notice that Michael violated his lease agreement by making unauthorized modifications to his office space. Michael started to stand again. His attorney pulled him back down. As his landlord, I've initiated eviction proceedings. Michael will need to find new office space within 60 days. Eviction proceedings. The courtroom was silent, except for the sound of Michael's sharp intake of breath. Judge Harrison looked at Michael. Mr. Hartwell, you're trying to have your landlord declared incompetent? Your Honor, I didn't know. You didn't know that your mother owns the building where you work? No, Your Honor. You didn't know about her extensive property holdings? No, Your Honor. You didn't know about her sophisticated investment portfolio? No, Your Honor. Judge Harrison turned back to me. Mrs. Hartwell, why didn't you tell your son about your financial situation? Because I wanted to see how he would treat me when he thought I was vulnerable. I wanted to know if he would show respect for an elderly family member who appeared to need assistance. And what did you learn? I learned that my son only shows respect to people he believes have power. When he thought I was helpless, he tried to control me. When he thought I was confused, he tried to manipulate me. Judge Harrison reviewed the case file. Mr. Hartwell, based on the evidence presented, your mother appears to be extremely competent. She's successfully managed a multi-million-dollar portfolio for decades. Your Honor, I was trying to protect her. You were trying to control assets you didn't know existed. Michael's attorney requested a brief recess. Michael looked devastated. The confident expression was gone, replaced by shock and growing panic. When court resumed, Michael's attorney made a final attempt. Your Honor, even if Mrs. Hartwell is financially competent, she's shown poor judgment in family relationships. She's punishing her son for caring about her welfare. Poor judgment in family relationships. Punishing him for caring. Michael's lawyer was still trying to frame his control attempts as love. Judge Harrison looked skeptical. Counselor, if someone tried to have you declared incompetent so they could control your assets, how would you respond? That's different, Your Honor. How is it different? Mrs. Hartwell is elderly. She's grieving. She may not understand the implications of her decisions. May not understand the implications. Michael's attorney was still arguing that age and grief automatically meant incompetence. Counselor, Mrs. Hartwell just demonstrated sophisticated understanding of complex financial arrangements. She's managed successful investments for 4 decades. What evidence suggests she doesn't understand implications? The attorney had no response. Judge Harrison delivered his ruling. Petition for guardianship is denied. Mrs. Hartwell has clearly demonstrated her competence and capacity for independent decision-making. Petition denied. I had won. But more importantly, Michael had lost. Furthermore, Judge Harrison continued, this court is concerned about the motivations behind this petition. Mr. Hartwell appears to have filed for guardianship without understanding his mother's actual circumstances. Concerned about motivations. Filed without understanding circumstances. The judge was questioning Michael's intentions. Mrs. Hartwell, you're free to continue managing your own affairs as you see fit. Free to manage my own affairs. The legal validation I'd needed. Michael for court. Michael approached me in the hallway. He looked shattered. Mom, I had no idea about the money. I thought you were struggling financially. I know what you thought, Michael. If I'd known about your investments, I never would have. Exactly. You would have treated me differently if you'd known I had money. Michael realized his mistake. That's not what I meant. That's exactly what you meant. You show respect only to people you think have power. Mom, can we start over? Can we forget this happened? Start over. Forget this happened. Michael wanted to erase his attempted control now that he understood my actual financial position. Michael, you spent a week documenting my behavior to build a case for my incompetence. You recruited neighbors to testify about my declining mental state. You filed legal papers claiming I needed a guardian. I was worried about you. You were planning to control me. Mom, I'm sorry, I made a mistake. Yes, you did. You made the mistake of assuming that grief made me helpless. That widowhood made me incompetent. That age made me vulnerable to manipulation. Michael looked desperate. What can I do to fix this? Nothing. Some mistakes can't be fixed with apologies. But I'm your son. You're my son who tried to steal my autonomy, who used legal pressure to force me out of my home, who treated me like a problem instead of a person. Mom, please, I need your forgiveness. Michael, forgiveness isn't the issue. Trust is the issue. You've shown me that you can't be trusted to respect my decisions or treat me with basic human dignity. What does that mean for our relationship? It means you've damaged our relationship beyond repair. And my inheritance? There it was. Michael's real concern. Not our relationship. Not my welfare. His inheritance. Your inheritance has been restructured. Rebecca will inherit the commercial properties. You'll inherit this house and nothing else. Rebecca gets millions and I get 400,000? Rebecca treated me with respect when she thought I had nothing. You tried to control me when you thought I was helpless. That's not fair. Michael, fairness would be giving you nothing. You attempted to steal from me through legal manipulation. I didn't know I was trying to steal. You knew you were trying to control assets that didn't belong to you. Michael's face hardened. The mask of contrition slipped. Fine. But don't expect me to take care of you when you actually do need help. Don't expect me to take care of you. Michael's true character was showing again. When he couldn't get what he wanted through manipulation, he turned to threats. All. Michael, I have $24,000 in monthly income. I can hire any assistance I need. Money can't buy family loyalty. You're right. Family loyalty can't be bought. It has to be earned through consistent respect and love. And I didn't earn it? You attempted to have me declared legally incompetent so you could control my life. What do you think? Michael turned and walked away without another word. No goodbye. No acknowledgement of the relationship he'd destroyed through his own choices. I watched him leave the courthouse. A 45-year-old man who'd assumed his inheritance was guaranteed, regardless of how he treated the person who'd earned it. A son who'd learned too late that respect isn't inherited. It's earned through behavior that demonstrates love rather than control. 6 months later, I received news that Michael's law practice was struggling. The office relocation had been expensive. Several clients had left during the transition. His partnership was under financial stress. Meanwhile, Rebecca had moved back to Millbrook to help me manage my property investments. She'd proven to be gifted at tenant relations and property development. The daughter who'd shown me respect was now learning to build wealth through the same strategies I'd used. Superturgias or as two stayed. Hey, property to dust. Mom, Rebecca said one evening as we reviewed financial statements. Do you ever regret what happened with Michael? I regret that Michael chose control over love, but I don't regret protecting myself from his manipulation. Do you think he's learned anything? Michael learned that assumptions about other people's capabilities can be expensive. Whether he learned anything about respect and relationships remains to be seen. Will you ever forgive him? Rebecca, forgiveness isn't the issue. Michael would need to demonstrate fundamental changes in his character before we could rebuild a relationship. And if he never changes, then he'll live with the consequences of his choices, just like everyone else. 1 year later, Michael sent a letter. A formal apology acknowledging his mistakes and requesting a chance to rebuild our relationship. Maita Hungol. I read the letter twice, then filed it away without responding. Hungol Manuatoy Forgin. Some lessons need time to take root. Some people need to live with consequences before they truly understand what they've lost. Michael had chosen to treat me like an incompetent burden when he thought I was vulnerable. He'd used legal pressure to try to control my life. He'd recruited neighbors to testify about my declining capabilities. Those choices had cost him millions of dollars in inheritance. More importantly, they'd cost him a relationship with his mother. Whether Michael would ever understand the difference between caring about someone and controlling them remained to be seen. Whether he would ever develop the character necessary for healthy family relationships was his choice to make. But those changes would need to be real and lasting before I would consider reopening a relationship he'd destroyed through his own actions. My name is Eleanor Hartwell. I'm 75 years old. Last year, I became the most underestimated woman in my late husband's family circle. Not because I was weak or confused or incompetent, but because I chose to reveal my true capabilities only after people showed me their true character. I learned that my son viewed elderly family members as problems to be managed, rather than people to be respected. That he assumed grief and widowhood meant incompetence and vulnerability. I discovered that he was willing to use legal manipulation to get what he wanted from someone he thought was too weak to resist. So I showed him exactly what he was trying to control, exactly what he was about to lose, exactly how expensive it could be to underestimate someone. Michael thought he was protecting his inheritance by forcing me into assisted living. Instead, he destroyed his inheritance by showing me who he really was. The woman he tried to manipulate proved to be the woman who controlled his future. The mother he assumed was helpless turned out to be the landlord who could evict him. The confused widow he wanted to protect didn't need protection, she needed respect. And she was prepared to take dramatic action to get it. Sometimes the best lessons are the most expensive ones. Sometimes people need to lose everything they take for granted before they learn to appreciate what they had. Michael wanted to control wealth he'd never earned. Instead, he lost wealth he'd always assumed was his. The difference between those outcomes was simple. Respect. Respect for elderly family members. Respect for other people's autonomy. Respect for the difference between caring about someone and controlling them. Hupper failed that test. Rebecca passed it. Now Rebecca manages a multi-million-dollar property portfolio, while Michael struggles with a failing law practice and a $400,000 inheritance. The consequences match their character. As they should. Because respect isn't optional in relationships. Love doesn't justify control. And assumptions about other people's capabilities can be very expensive mistakes. NAS's, I'm living proof that it's never too late to demand the respect you deserve. Never too late to show people that underestimating you was their mistake, not yours. The woman they thought was helpless was actually the most powerful person in their lives. Punna. They just didn't know it until it was too late to matter. 3 years have passed since that courtroom confrontation. 3 years since Michael learned that his helpless mother owned a multi-million-dollar empire. 3 years since he discovered the most expensive lesson of his life. Today I'm sitting in my sunroom watching Rebecca tend the garden we planted together. She's 28 now, confident, capable, everything I hoped she would become when she was a little girl. Grandma Eleanor, she calls from the flower bed. The contractors finished the renovation on the Portland property. We're ready to start showing it to potential tenants. The Portland property, a 6-unit apartment complex Rebecca found and convinced me to purchase last year. Her first major contribution to our growing portfolio. What's the projected rental income? $8,400 monthly once we're fully occupied. Should have positive cash flow within 6 months. $8,400 monthly. Rebecca has learned to think like a businesswoman. She evaluates properties based on numbers rather than emotions, considers long-term returns rather than short-term costs. More importantly, she treats me like a partner rather than a burden. She asks for my advice on investment decisions, respects my experience while contributing her own insights, shows me the kind of relationship Michael never learned to build. Rebecca, you've become quite the property developer. I had a good teacher. A good teacher. I've spent 3 years sharing knowledge that took me 4 decades to accumulate. Teaching Rebecca strategies for building wealth through real estate investment. Showing her how to evaluate opportunities and manage risk. But I've also taught her something more important. How to treat people with respect regardless of their apparent power or resources. How to build relationships based on love rather than control. How to earn trust through consistent behavior over time. Lessons Michael never learned despite 45 years of opportunity. My phone buzzes with a text message. From an unknown number. Mrs. Hartwell, this is Sandra Mills, Michael's former law partner. I thought you should know that Michael filed for bankruptcy yesterday. His practice failed completely. He's lost everything. Bankruptcy. Lost everything. Michael's financial collapse is now complete. I show the message to Rebecca. She reads it twice before responding. Mom, are you going to reach out to him? Should I? Rebecca considers the question carefully. Michael made his choices. He's living with the consequences. But he's still your son. Still your son. The biological relationship that Michael assumed would protect him from the results of his behavior. What do you think I should do? That's your decision. But whatever you do, don't let him manipulate you again. Don't let him manipulate you again. Rebecca understands that caring about someone doesn't mean enabling their poor choices. An hour later, my phone rings. Michael's name appears on the screen. His first call in over 2 years. Mom? His voice sounds defeated, broken. Hello, Michael? I suppose you heard about the bankruptcy. I heard. I lost the house, the car, everything I thought I owned. Everything he thought he owned. Michael is learning the difference between having money and controlling money. I'm sorry to hear that. Are you? Or are you satisfied that I finally got what I deserved? Satisfied that you got what you deserved. Michael is still framing his consequences as punishment, rather than natural results of his choices. Michael, I'm never satisfied when someone suffers. But I'm not surprised when poor decisions lead to poor outcomes. Poor decisions like trying to protect my mother? 3 years later, Michael is still characterizing his manipulation attempts as loving concern. Poor decisions like trying to control someone without understanding their situation. I didn't know about your money. You didn't know because you never asked. You assumed. You made plans based on assumptions rather than facts. Mom, I need help. There it was. The request I'd been expecting since Sandra's text message. What kind of help? Financial help. I can't afford rent. I'm living in my car. I need somewhere to stay while I figure out my next step. Somewhere to stay. Financial help. Michael wanted me to rescue him from consequences he'd created through his own choices. Michael, 3 years ago you tried to have me declared incompetent so you could control my assets. I was wrong about that. You were wrong about everything. You were wrong about my capabilities. Wrong about my resources. Wrong about your right to manage my life. I know that now. Do you? Or do you just know that you need money? Michael was quiet for a long moment. Mom, I've learned my lesson. I understand now that I was trying to control you instead of help you. Learned my lesson. Understand now. The words people say when they want something rather than when they've actually changed. Michael, what specifically have you learned? That you're not helpless. That you don't need my protection. That you're capable of managing your own affairs. Capable of managing your own affairs. Michael had learned facts about my competence. But had he learned anything about respect and relationships? What else have you learned? That I shouldn't have assumed you needed assistance without asking first. Shouldn't have assumed. Again, Michael was focusing on his mistakes rather than the character flaws that caused them. Michael, let me ask you something. If I were actually struggling financially, would it have been acceptable to try to control my living situation and financial decisions? Well, if you actually needed help. Michael still believed that need justified control. That vulnerability gave him the right to override my autonomy. So you think it's acceptable to manipulate elderly family members as long as they actually need assistance? That's not what I said. That's exactly what you said. You think your methods were wrong only because I wasn't actually helpless. Michael realized his mistake too late. No, Michael, you haven't learned the real lesson. You still think caring about someone gives you the right to control them. Mom, please, I have nowhere else to go. Nowhere else to go. The appeal to family obligation that Michael hoped would override my memory of his behavior. Michael, you could have had everything. The commercial properties, the rental income, a secure financial future. I know. You lost all of that because you chose control over respect. Manipulation over love. Entitlement over earning. I understand that now. Do you? Because you're asking me to rescue you from consequences you created. That sounds like more entitlement. Mom, I'm not asking for money. Just somewhere to stay temporarily. Just somewhere to stay. As if providing housing wasn't providing financial assistance. Michael, what would change if I helped you now? I'd be grateful. I'd treat you with the respect you deserve. You'd treat me with respect. Michael was offering respect as payment for assistance rather than as a basic requirement for relationships. Would you treat me with respect if I said no? Michael hesitated. That hesitation revealed everything I needed to know about his character development. Michael, people who've actually learned about respect don't offer it conditionally. Mom, I'm desperate. I understand that, but desperation doesn't erase history. So you're gonna let me be homeless? Let you be homeless. As if his homelessness was my responsibility rather than his consequence. Michael, you're 48 years old. You're a trained attorney. You're capable of solving your own problems. But you have the resources to help me. Having resources doesn't create obligations. Especially not to people who've tried to steal those resources through legal manipulation. Michael, 3 years ago you documented my behavior to build a case for guardianship. You recruited neighbors to testify about my incompetence. You filed legal papers claiming I needed supervision. I was wrong. You were calculating. You made strategic decisions to gain control of my life and assets. I'm sorry for that. Sorry isn't enough. Some actions have permanent consequences. So this is permanent? You'll never help me? Never help you. Michael wanted guarantees about future assistance rather than accepting responsibility for current circumstances. Michael, help is earned through consistent respect and love, not demanded during crises. I do love you. You love what I can provide. That's not the same thing. Mom, please, I have nowhere else to turn. Nowhere else to turn. The final appeal that Michael hoped would trigger my maternal instincts. Michael, you turned to legal manipulation when you thought I was vulnerable. Why should I turn to financial rescue when you're vulnerable? Because you're a better person than I am. A better person than you are. Michael was using flattery to justify his request for assistance. Being a better person doesn't mean enabling poor choices. So that's it? You're going to abandon your own son? Abandon your own son. Michael was using guilt to pressure me into providing support I didn't owe him. Michael, I didn't abandon you. You abandoned our relationship when you chose manipulation over respect. I can't change the past, but you can accept responsibility for it and live with the consequences. Mom, Michael, I hope you find a way to rebuild your life. But you'll need to do it without my financial assistance. This isn't over. This isn't over. Even while asking for help, Michael was making threats about future actions. Yes, it is. Take care of yourself. I hung up before he could respond. Rebecca had overheard the conversation from the kitchen. She brought me a cup of tea and sat down beside me. How do you feel about that decision? Sad, but certain. Michael still doesn't understand what he did wrong. Do you think he ever will? I think Michael will learn to say the right words. But changing fundamental character requires work he's never been willing to do. And if he does change, then he'll change for his own benefit, not to manipulate me into providing assistance. Rebecca nodded. You're protecting yourself. I'm protecting my peace of mind. I'm too old to waste energy on people who view relationships as opportunities for control. That evening, I received a voicemail from Patricia, my attorney. Eleanor, Michael called my office today. He's threatening to challenge the trust structures we established. He claims undue influence and mental incapacity at the time of execution. Undue influence. Mental incapacity. Michael was still trying to use legal pressure to get what he wanted. Headrate, I called Patricia back immediately. Can he actually challenge the trusts? He can try, but we have extensive documentation of your competence, medical evaluations, financial records, the court transcripts from his failed guardianship petition, court transcripts, evidence that Michael had already tried to have me declared incompetent and failed completely. How strong would his case be? Extremely weak, but litigation is expensive and time-consuming even when you win. What are my options? We could seek sanctions for frivolous litigation. Michael has already lost one legal challenge to your competence. Sanctions for frivolous litigation. Legal consequences for Michael's continued attempts to manipulate the system. Do it. File for sanctions if he submits any challenge to the trust structures. Eleanor, are you sure? Michael is your son. Michael is a person who uses legal threats to manipulate family members. That behavior has consequences regardless of biological relationships. 2 weeks later, Patricia called with an update. Michael withdrew his threat to challenge the trusts. Apparently, his bankruptcy attorney advised him that frivolous litigation could result in additional legal penalties. Withdrew his threat. Michael's latest manipulation attempt had failed before it began. So it's over? This round is over. But Eleanor, people like Michael don't usually stop trying. They just change tactics. Change tactics? Michael would continue looking for ways to gain access to wealth he'd never earned. Then we'll be ready for whatever he tries next. 6 months later, I learned that Michael had moved to another state. Started working as a contract attorney for small firms. Living in a rented room. Earning enough to survive, but nothing close to the lifestyle he'd once enjoyed. The lifestyle that had been funded by rental income from properties he'd never known existed. Rebecca and I continued expanding our real estate portfolio. We bought 2 more apartment complexes, renovated a small office building, added a warehouse to our commercial holdings we earlier were. Our monthly rental income exceeded $30,000. Our total net worth approached $6 million. We were building wealth that would last for generations. More importantly, we were building a relationship based on mutual respect and shared goals. Rebecca treated me like a valued mentor and partner. I treated her like a capable adult who deserved trust and responsibility. Torn. The kind of relationship Michael could have had if he'd chosen respect over control. On my 78th birthday, Rebecca surprised me with a gift that brought tears to my eyes. A framed photograph of our newest property acquisition. A small office building in the downtown area where I'd grown up above my parents' grocery store. Mom, this building is 3 blocks from where your family's store used to be. 3 blocks from Sullivan's Market, where I'd learned my first lessons about property investment and business management. It's perfect. I thought we could renovate it and dedicate a small space to display the history of downtown Millbrook, including your family's contribution to the community. Display the history, including your family's contribution. Rebecca wanted to honor the roots of our business success. That's a beautiful idea. We'll call it the Sullivan Hartwell Community Center. After your maiden name and married name, Sullivan Hartwell Community Center. A permanent reminder of the journey from grocery store apartment to multi-million-dollar empire. Rebecca, you've given me the perfect birthday gift. You've given me the perfect life education. Perfect life education. Not just about building wealth, but about building character. About treating people with respect. About earning trust through consistent behavior over time. Lessons Michael had 48 years to learn but chose not to absorb. That evening, as Rebecca and I walked through our newest property, I reflected on the path that had brought us here, the decisions that had shaped our lives and relationships. Michael had chosen manipulation over respect, control over love, entitlement over earning. Those choices had cost him millions of dollars and a relationship with his mother. Rebecca had chosen respect over expectation, partnership over control, earning over entitlement. Those choices had brought her wealth, responsibility, and a loving family relationship. The difference between their outcomes wasn't luck or favoritism. It was character. Character expressed through daily choices about how to treat other people, how to build relationships, how to respond when someone appears vulnerable or needs assistance. Michael had failed that test spectacularly. Rebecca had passed it beautifully. Now, Rebecca managed a real estate empire while Michael worked contract jobs in another state. The consequences matched their character perfectly. Passa state sagt. Some people learn respect through love, others learn it through loss, a few never learn it at all. Michael fell into that final category. Despite losing everything he'd valued, he still viewed relationships as opportunities for control, rather than connections based on mutual care. But that was his choice to make and his consequence to live with. I'd built my wealth through 4 decades of strategic decisions and careful planning. I'd earned the right to share that wealth with people who treated me with respect and love. People like Rebecca, who saw me as a person worth knowing rather than a resource worth controlling. Helpless. My name is Eleanor Hartwell. I'm 78 years old. 4 years ago, my son tried to have me declared incompetent so he could control my life. Today, I control a $6 million empire with a daughter who treats me like a valued partner and trusted friend. The woman Michael underestimated proved to be the woman who controlled his future. The mother he tried to manipulate became the person who determined his inheritance. Respect isn't optional in relationships. Love doesn't justify control. And assumptions about other people's capabilities can be life-changing mistakes. I'm living proof that it's never too late to demand the respect you deserve. Never too late to choose relationships based on character rather than biology. Some lessons cost money to learn. Others cost relationships. A few cost everything you thought you owned. Michael learned the most expensive lesson of all, that underestimating someone can cost you everything you assumed was yours by right. The woman he thought was helpless was actually the most powerful person in his life. He just learned that truth too late to matter. Humada Anthelas. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.